This is Whiskey's Travels by Alicia Tenges for Geography 101, Summer 2018. Where it began. Alcohol in general is a fascinating topic, and whiskey, or whiskey without the E, is an enduring form of it that has continued to spread and develop for centuries. The amber-colored liquor that is popular the world over originated from the European island countries of Ireland and Scotland. As alcoholic critic and writer Corsair wrote, "Put simply, whiskey is an alcoholic beverage that is distilled from fermented cereal grain and aged in wooden casks. At one time considered an uncivilized drink, it has evolved through years of consumption to become one of the highest demanded alcoholic drinks on the market. Whiskey has been considered a source of evil, a source of enjoyment, a source of revenue, and more. There have been whiskey rebellions, whiskey rings, whiskey taxes. The richness of whiskey's history is impressive. Once the drink of the Highlands, bogs, and peats of Scotland and Ireland, whiskey made its transition from Old World to New with the immigrants from those lands to America. Whiskey did not stop its journey after transatlantic immigration from Ireland, Scotland to America. It became a worldwide drink due to increased globalization." The regions of alcohol. Earlier alcohol. Fermentation of fruits and grains has been recorded in the earliest civilizations. According to anthropologist Jennings et al., beer fermenting process as well as distillation processes were recorded in ancient Egypt. During the age of the Greek and Roman empires, wine production was cultivated, improving wine quality and availability, making it a staple drink. Wine consumption continued in European areas such as France, Italy, and Spain after the collapse of the Roman Empire. Without the climate for grape growth, Scotland and Ireland developed their own form of spirits. These regions boasted cooler weather and higher precipitation, moderated by the North Atlantic current. Both islands were able to produce cereal crops in regular seasons, and barley was highly available. Their spirit of choice was barley fermented and distilled into whiskey. The cultural landscape of whiskey. Though distillation has been recorded for centuries before whiskey was produced in the Pict and Celtic countries, Irish Osci Ba and Scottish Uisci Bea, or water of life, or as we know it, whiskey, originated in Ireland and Scotland, beginning with alchemists trying to produce medicines and psychotropic health aids, then by monks, primarily for health and religious reasons, followed by farmers and local communities who consumed whiskey for recreational and social purposes. Spirits expert Corsair noted, "The earliest irrefutable evidence of whiskey making did not appear until the year 1494, when the Scottish Exchequer Rolls includes an entry reading 8 bowls of malt to Friar John Core wherewith to make aqua vitae." The drink was the local alcohol and only became more widely recognized after King James IV of Scotland granted charters regulating the production of and distillation of whiskey to the medical community of his time in the early 15th century. Corsair, 2012. In the higher circles of society, whiskey tended to be considered a medicinal drink, while in the lower classes, it was regarded more as a recreational beverage. Irish whiskey has a slightly different process. It's distilled 3 times rather than twice, as was the Scottish process. The historical references to whiskey in Ireland are not as clear as the Scottish Exchequer Rolls. There are references to Irish aqua vitae and Uisci Ba in the story of Strongbow circa 1170, reported by the English soldiers, though it does not as clearly indicate whiskey as the malt for the entry written in the Scottish Exchequer Rolls. Later, around and after 1580, under English rule, laws and taxes restricting whiskey production, distribution, and consumption in Ireland would clearly illustrate Ireland's widespread whiskey production and consumption. Diffusion. Where it went. Whiskey's journey to America was uneventful, with the high amount of early immigrants being poor Scottish and Irish, whether they came voluntarily or as prisoners and indentured servants. Whiskey traveled across the Atlantic. A dominant theory is that some of these Irish or Scottish immigrants brought distilling equipment and propagated the liquor in the frontier country. Historian Bettit states, many of the earliest Scots-Irish immigrants of the 1720s and 1730s first settled Pennsylvania, then moved down from Pennsylvania into Virginia and the Carolinas. From there, immigrants and their descendants went on to populate the states of Georgia, Kentucky, and Tennessee in the 1780s and 1790s. In these remote areas where shipping costs from the coastal colonies was too high for sustenance farmers, whiskey production thrived. Because early American society copied the British, the common alcohols consumed were beer, rum, wine, and port. In the lead up to and immediately following the Revolutionary War, these drinks were harder to come by, since taxes on raw products used to make alcohol were extremely high, and alcohol, along with other imports from Britain, had essentially ceased. Bellino, 2018. Whiskey made from rural distilleries was more readily available and became the young country's de facto drink. Distance decay. Agriculture has varied the whiskey production. The Phillips Encyclopedia, 2007, commented, a big difference in the Scottish-Irish whiskey and American whiskey are the grains used, saying Scotch whiskey and Irish whiskey are both distilled from barley that has been allowed to sprout. In the U.S., maize and rye are used to produce bourbon whiskey, corn, and rye whiskey. These shifts in grain, as well as shifts in production methods, were an outgrowth of government influence and geographical considerations. American whiskey production was a haphazard process in the settler and revolutionary periods. Farmers would use any grain available, including an indigenous grain, corn, for spirit distillation, changing the tradition of whiskey production. As early as the Revolutionary War, the American government was concerned with the immense amount of wheat, oat, barley, buckwheat, and to a lesser extent rye, used in the production of whiskey. In following years, states would legislate what grains could be used for alcohol production, resulting in rye becoming a preferred grain for whiskey making, since it was less restricted and retained the taste of whiskey. Corn was also used, since it was highly available, but it was less preferred since it altered the final product significantly. Blending rye and corn alcohols before aging, with the larger percent being rye, gave the liquor the flavor and title of whiskey. In blended whiskeys, the differences in grains and geographical locations those grains are grown in is less noticeable. However, according to master testers, in the unblended or single malt whiskeys, this difference in color, taste, and smell are distinguishable in the different grains as well as the climates the grains were grown in. This 2006, making Irish, Scottish, and American whiskeys sometimes remarkably different. Further migration. Though the Irish and Scots immigrated to Canada as well as what would become the United States, the political landscape affected whiskey production and consumption. Whiskey lagged behind in Canada, occupying a lesser place in the alcoholic consumption due to higher availability of imported and more socially accepted alcoholic beverages. Canadian whiskey production and export has not yet caught up with America, Ireland, or Scotland, nor do Canadian brands enjoy the same popularity as their southern neighbors. Canada imports a large amount of American whiskey, holding the title of the largest importer of American whiskey in 2017, according to Eads. New markets. A major change in whiskey production was the shift from small batch for personal consumption and sale of excess to mass production primarily for sale. The increase in volume affected every part of the process, from mash to distillation and aging. With the change from personal consumption to a marketable product, whiskey has traveled further. Scottish and Irish single malt whiskies in particular enjoy popularity with whiskey aficionados and are extensively exported. The British Isles exports the largest amount of whiskey worldwide. However, American whiskeys are rapidly rising in popularity both internally and globally. According to an alcohol business publication, The Drinks Business, American whiskey especially has found immense popularity in Japan, Brazil, Canada, Germany, and France. Eads, 2017. It is partially the enjoyment of liquor and partially the appreciation of the American whiskey culture that has prompted the uptick in popularity. A case study by Rarick and Mitch, 2015, found that the big increase in American whiskey sales and exports is fueled in part by the popularity of American movies and television shows, along with changing tastes and preferences. Whiskey made its way from the Western world to the East, as shown by Japan's whiskey production. In the late 19th century, progressive Japan was open to Western alcohol with exposure to Europeans and their culture. After World War I, an enterprising Japanese man, Tori Shinjiro, studied whiskey production and began his own whiskey distillery, spurring a new process and market in whiskey production, according to Kosair, 2012. As relatively new to the Western liquor, the country is impressive as the 10th largest whiskey exporter and has won world recognition for quality whiskey. Top Whiskey Exporters 2016. Last thoughts. Whiskey is interesting. The difference of Old World and New World liquor can be vast or fairly insignificant, depending on grains, production, and blending. The history and changing attitude towards whiskey is complex. Just 20 years ago, it was considered an old man's drink or a cowboy drink. Now, whiskey is extremely popular. The trends have shifted favorably in whiskey's direction. The state of Colorado alone has a large concentration of small batch, well-aged craft whiskeys and high-end distilleries that are extremely popular locally as well as globally. American whiskey has become a great blend of New World production with that Old World craftsmanship. References. Images used.